morning and welcome to a very special interview show of the Prode. Today, it's my pleasure to host Professor Bharat Karnad sir on our show to discuss the ongoing tensions between Russian Federation and Ukraine. Professor Karnad is the Distinguished Fellow at the United Service Institute of India and Emeritus Professor for National Security Studies, Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out the time and a very warm welcome to the Prode.
Thank you.
Sir, I would like to begin the discussion by asking what is your assessment of the current situation and what are your thoughts on the recent updates coming from Kyiv about the Russian invasion?
Well, yeah, first of all, I think there might be some problem with calling it an invasion and so on and so forth. Because in military terms, when you say something is an invasion, you are referring to a far bigger military effort with far larger forces moving in very determinedly in a warlike fashion to eliminate the adversary. In this case, what you find is anything but, operations of that kind. What we have, and I think, just yesterday published a piece where I liken the Ukraine war so far to the Indian Army's police action in Hyderabad. What I mean by that is that if you look at how over the last 10 days the Russian forces have come in, mostly from the east, and trying to reach the Black Sea coast. If you see Mariupol, Kherson, and so on and so forth, and you already have, of course, Russia has already recognized the Russian-speaking independent republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. So if you take that entire belt out and then you see how the Russian forces are moving, they are moving in an easterly direction to come in to the Black Sea coast. And one can see why. And you see the west of Kiev and that entire western central Ukraine has been left free. There's nothing happening there. So this is not war or invasion, for God's sake. I think let's at least begin to label things right. Because, as I said, it gives a very wrong impression of what it is that's being done. And maybe that's motivated, maybe, everybody in the West, and starting with the US, led kind of media coverage and so on, wants to hammer that in, that this is that kind of a military operation. But one has to understand why it is that the Russians are extremely apprehensive of Ukraine joining NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, because they have lost most of the constituent states of the Soviet Union. Many of them, like Latvia and Estonia, and where's the third one? Lithuania,
Yeah,
are already formal members of NATO. They have lost their cordon sanitaire, the buffer state, tier of states that form the Warsaw Pact, most of them joining NATO. Now, you can see why Kremlin would be a little apprehensive and even paranoid that you have these people bordering on you that are all members of a formal military alliance. Now, think of it this way. If Ukraine formally joins NATO, then you will have not just the air bases in Ukraine surrounding, in the north and west and the east and so on, available to NATO aircraft, bomber aircraft, fighter aircraft, and so on, and the entire Black Sea available to NATO and American navies. And the Black Sea is what I've argued is the reason why the Russians are particularly worked up about, because that's the vulnerable part of the country, and their security vulnerability actually comes from the Black Sea approaches. So that's why you are seeing what you're seeing, which is an attempt to capture the Black Sea coast. And so, but there's a problem there. The problem is the 1997 partition agreement between, the successor states of Russia and Ukraine. The partition agreement said that the naval bases and the naval infrastructure on the Black Sea coast including the naval bases at Odessa and Sevastopol, which hosted the Russian and earlier Soviet Black Sea Fleet, and then which was divided up between the Lithuanian and the Russian navies, would both share all these infrastructure. Now, how is this going to work? I mean, think of it. Now, if Ukraine remains the way it is, and it becomes a NATO country, and Russian Navy still has, according to the agreement, access to some of these ports in whatever fashion, it is not workable, right? Because you'll have US and NATO navies coming in and using the Ukrainian ports of Odessa and Sevastopol and other infrastructure, smaller ports and harbors. So this is simply not feasible. And that was the reason why I think um, the Putin regime wanted very much for some kind of commitment from the US and EU and so on, and not to push Ukraine or admit it formally into NATO and just let it be, and we'll all live happily together, because there are all these other issues that are simply not reconcilable with our security. But the US and the EU, in a triumphalist vein, I think, insisted, well, no, we are going to push our advantage to the maximum, and we'll take Russia on. Now, you can poke a Russian bear only so much, and what you end up having is what you do now, which is Russians saying, okay, in that case, let's see what happens. And they're going in for what they've done. Again, I think it's a very limited operation, as I've called it, a police action. And they mean to, leave for Ukraine the kind of fairly, leave it as, ideally at least, as an independent entity that will not join NATO. So you take out Donetsk, you take out the Luhansk republics, and then you take out some of the parts that they are now occupying, Mariupol on down to the coast, and you take Odessa and Sevastopol. And what is the rump state of Ukraine will be allowed to stay as is. They can have their own government. But then Zelensky is, a very inspiring leader and extremely highly motivated person who has really got the Ukrainian people going and willing to sacrifice and so on. But ultimately in a hopeless task.
Yeah.
You cannot take on the Russian land forces, and even less the Russian air forces, should the NATO or the US in fit of bad judgment and bad decisions, then impose a no-fly zone or something. That will be devastating, because then you have major war, not involving Ukraine so much as Russia and America. And that is the context in which I think Putin mentioned nuclear weapons. That then all the balloons are up. Then you better be prepared, as we will be prepared, for the worst. Because the implicit warning there was that if you don't understand the limits of your advantage, that this is how far you can go without provoking us, and you keep on pushing and keep on prodding us into acting, then we'll act, and we will secure our interests, whatever it takes. And I think this is the lesson that's being sent home, but it's doubtful whether the Biden administration is getting it. Biden himself is an old Cold War horse. From that time he's nearly 80. It's very difficult for him to adjust when actually there's China right there looming, and it'll take the pickings, as it were, once the things settle down to its benefit. So, I think this is really the context for the whole thing that we need to be aware of, rather than be consumed by, I think, motivated coverage. And generally, people don't know what's really happening. And this is the real happening. Just look at the map and how the Russians are progressing, and what I'm saying will be borne out.
Coming to the USA, why is it so that nations like USA, UK, France, and even all the Western countries have decided not to send their military to help Ukraine? What could be the practical reason behind this move? And because we all know how much firepower these countries have together. So Why
Yeah,
is it so
well,
that they're afraid of sending their troops? Instead of that, they're posting stories on Instagram that we are standing with Ukraine. I mean, I'm in UK and I have seen one of very senior members of the government in UK posting stories on Instagram that we stand with Ukraine and stuff. And why is it so?
well, as it is, they're all ready to fight to the last Ukrainian. You know, I mean, who wants to tangle with the Russian bear? Tell me, I mean, which NATO country in its right mind would want to tangle in a land war with Russia? I mean, Russia had never been defeated in a land war. The Nazis were beaten. Napoleon Bonaparte in the early 19th century was defeated. So you think the Americans are going to succeed now, or NATO? They know they don't have the capabilities for it. And that's the reason why no one wants to get boots on the ground. They don't want the soldiers there. They don't want their fighting armaments there. You know, they might pass on jets, combat aircraft, you know, through various means to Ukraine and so on. But that's not the same thing as actually fighting the Russians, which they don't want to do and they won't do. They're not idiots. So, as I said, if you're going to fight to the last Ukrainian, the first people who should know that they have to fight, no one else is going to do the fighting for them or even come to the help, should be the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
This is where I think they're being caught up in the Zelensky. It's very motivated and highly patriotic and nationalistic sentiments, which is a very good thing. And you know, it's very inspiring, even for those of us who see the situation in Ukraine and so on. But ultimately, there's a futility to something that you're attempting. And I think it's needless because the Russians are not saying we'll take over Ukraine. They're merely saying don't join NATO. Two very different things. Uh, uh, and if that's not understood by Ukrainian government or the people, then it is very difficult to know what to make of the Ukrainian generally, the Ukrainian understanding of what the game is about.
Yeah.
This is what the game is about. That the Russians will simply not allow Ukraine, which is really at the heart of things in some ways, because as I mentioned, the Black Sea frontages and so on, to fall into NATO hands.
Yeah. So coming to the sanctions, why is it so that the Russian Federation doesn't care about sanctions anymore? What could be the possible reason behind this? Because even after so announcement of so many sanctions, they are not stopping their movement at all.
For one reason, because they have literally hundreds of billions of dollars in hard currency reserves already. They can write out sanctions. What are sanctions? You know, I mean, sanctions can be imposed only for a short while before they become leaky and things carry on. I mean, India survived sanctions. India, a very weak economy, survived sanctions for many, many years after the 1998 test series of explosions. What happened? Nothing happened. I mean, they started coming back in. So this is what's going to happen to Russia. And the problem is, as the Russians see it, they have a very winning hand. They have all the oil and gas. All of German economy, in a very central way, depends on the Nord Stream 2 and the Nord Stream 1. Oil and gas coming in, powering the homes and heating the homes and powering their factories and so on and so forth. How do you think the Germans are going to manage now? If the Russians tomorrow decide, okay, you're going to play hardball, we're going to just cut off Nord Stream 2 and cut off any oil and gas flowing through to you guys on Nord Stream 1. Then what? Then you have to rely on the Arabs ramping up their production or the Americans, filling tankers with their oil, which they are not willing to do. You know, they say, oh, well, you take shale oil or something like that. Not the same thing because it's very uneconomical. And the Saudis are no fools either because they realize that the value of the oil in the ground is far more than if you pump it out. So, uh, you can't play that game against Russia. It may not be economically versatile and powerful as China is, in the sense America is, but it has enormous natural resources, minerals, most of the rare earths and stuff, and oil and gas. It's a treasure house. So, they don't bother. They'll be able to sell it. And, the sanction regime is going to fall by itself, of its own weight.
So coming to India, why is it so that India abstained on the resolution against the Russian Federation in the United Nations Security Council and also didn't participate in the vote in the General Assembly?
Yeah, for the obvious reason, that's not a fight. If it's not your fight, why should you take sides? Did the Americans and everybody else take sides when the Chinese came into Doklam and then last year, year before, into East Ladakh? We said that Chinese are occupying, they were aggressors and so on. No one gave a damn. No one came to say, oh, all right, oh yeah, this is bad, and then we should do something about it. So if you're not concerned, I mean, if it's not your fight, why should you put on the boots or put on the gloves? It makes no sense at all. And we have a very long and very rich history of cooperating with Russia. They have been very reliable friends. And militarily, they have given us virtually state-of-the-art equipment. Their fighter aircraft, everything that you want. While the Americans have merely talked about it. For instance, I'm just trying to compare the two patterns of promises versus actual delivery. And there the Russians have delivered every time. While the Americans are always held back because they don't like transferring their technology, selling it, or leave alone giving it away. So, for instance, the 2012 Defense Trade and Technology Initiative that was signed with a lot of hullabaloo in Delhi has so far, and that was supposed to produce collaborative projects, and a whole bunch of things, in the most advanced weapons systems and so on. And it didn't work that way because, nothing has come out of the pipeline. All we have is, a lot of talk and more promises, but no delivery on the DTTI projects. So this is the fact. That's reality. Now consider what the Russians have done. You ask for anything, they said, okay, take it. And the BrahMos is the most obvious thing.
Yeah.
It is the only supersonic cruise missile in the world.
Yeah.
It can take out anything. So,
and of course, they're super exclusive S-400 missile air defense.
S-400 missile. Yeah, no, it's not. It's an anti-aircraft system.
Yeah.
Not so much an anti-missile system. But, so they have been very forthcoming. Yes, we have paid good money, but they are willing to part with their frontier technology, which the Americans are simply not willing to do. So, and they have proved their friendship over time. They have helped us out with vetoes in the United Nations Security Council. Innumerable times. I know Kashmir's, the Kashmir thing has come up in the Security Council or in the Bangladesh war, in other wars, they've always helped us. So what have the Americans done for us lately? So that's ultimately the concern, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we are not in it for charity.
Yeah.
And so we have to be mindful of what these factors are. Why it is the government of India is very wary of upsetting or alienating Moscow.
Sir, you mentioned about the defense deal. So do you think that the ongoing sanctions will impact the S-400 deal between India and Russia?
No, not at all. I mean, you're talking about the cat's eye, I suppose. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. They haven't,
yeah.
Americans haven't invoked cat's eye so far. And they're unlikely to. Why would they want to imperil their partnership with India? Who else do they have in the Indian Ocean basin? What's Indo-Pacific except Pacific and India? Who else is there? Who do you think is going to replace India? I mean, Maldives, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. Who is there?
Yeah.
Iran? I mean, which country is there? It's just central to the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
You're right there, like an aircraft carrier jutting out into the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
You can take care of business from Aden to the Malacca Strait, right from our homeland. You don't even have to go, venture abroad. So no, one of the problems that I've always argued in my books and writings is that the government of India has never quite understood the leverages we have. And the more aggressively we are certain about where our interests lie, and where we should hold on to our positions, the steadier we will be, and the more you're going to be respected, and the greater purchase you will have in terms of making an impression on countries in the West, the US, and so on. Hey, do you think in that sense the US will be able to imperil those advantages? Why do you think they're making nicey statements coming out of Washington, despite
Yeah.
they're doing everything that, according to them, is wrong? But there's nothing they can do.
Even I heard a
Because
statement from their ambassador in India, and and like she mentioned that it's not that we like our relations with India is going to hamper because of these situations. Our relations with India stands at the place where it was standing before the crisis.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everybody understands. Look, the fact of the matter is, if you're a small country, if you do not have much of a purchase, you do not have much traction in terms of what you can afford other countries in terms of advantages or whatever, then you are at their beck and call. You invariably have to end up doing what's demanded of you. For instance, Pakistan, it's an unfortunate situation where, they have done exactly the same things as we have done, abstained in the United Nations resolutions and so on. And yet they are being slammed and they are going to suffer because they have been told that now we're going to bring a ton of bricks on you and pile it on you. So, and they've done exactly what we have done, except they don't have what we have.
Yeah.
So the point is that, we have to, I think as Indians, we need to become far more appreciative of our locational advantages, of our resource advantages and so on, and not be a supplicant, which for 30 years, what I've been saying in my books and so on. Finally, I think we are getting into that kind of policy mindset where we say, okay, you come here on our terms. You don't tell us what to do. We'll tell you how we are going to react on whose terms. And that's what Americans are accepting, which is what I've been saying. They will accept. I'm US trained. Most of my friends are Americans, and many of them in the highest positions in the US government over the years. And I've been telling them this for a very long time. And they understood that. It's just that the government of India was slow to understand our own advantages.
Yeah. Oh, okay, sir. What will be the economic impact of this whole crisis on India? We know there will be hardly any military impact on India, but what will be the economic impact?
Well, yeah, there's bound to be some considerable economic disadvantages and impact, because for the simple reason that the international trade is going to be disrupted. Right now, the oil thing is going out of whack, because Russian oil and gas was very much part of the energy demand and supply matrix. Now, with that being upset, and Saudi Arabia and the Arab countries unwilling, unless they are twisted, the arms are twisted some more and they deliver, they're unwilling to really happily ramp up their production, because they know that if they restrict the flow of oil, they get higher prices. So they like to see the prices go up. Prices may touch as high as, it's already $120 or something per barrel, might be 135. I don't know what the Brent crude price is now. It'll be around that level. It'll go up to $150 per barrel. It could. And that will, of course, put our budget out of whack, because we were planning on, $60 or whatever, whatever the price was some weeks back. And now that's going to be readjusted. That would have to be adjusted to take care of new reality. And we'll have to hunt around for where we get the cheapest oil, like Venezuela or something, where, we can perhaps try to salvage the situation that we have or find ourselves in. And whenever there's a disruption of this kind, there's disruption in the global supply chains and so on and so forth, which again, where we might be at the receiving end of some negative fallout. So so everybody's going to suffer. Unfortunately, all of Europe is going to suffer. Downstream countries like India, a little farther away, are going to suffer. America is going to suffer. So on and so forth. Some less than others, but everybody will suffer the economic consequences of this. And if it gets worse, then the higher will be the suffering or levels of suffering by countries differently placed.
Before asking the last question, I want to ask that what will happen to the India's Far East policy? Will it work the same?
Far East policy.
Yeah. Will it work the same,
Well,
or it will have some impact? The crisis will have some kind of impact on India's far act
yeah,
east policy.
yeah. The Far East policy, I mean, when we talk about the quadrilateral and so on, I've been advocating a slightly different quadrilateral. I've been saying that we have to, modify the quadrilateral for our own uses. And that quadrilateral and modified quadrilateral that I've described and conceived my last book again and earlier in my writings. This book was something called Staggering Forward, Narendra Modi and India's Global Ambition.
Yeah,
In that I sort of conceived of a modified quadrilateral, which is a mod quad. I called it mod quad, um, wherein America, because ultimately, yes, they want to be friends with us, we want to be friends with America, but the history and the record of the United States is as a very unreliable, untrustworthy partner, very unreliable. So the question that I've raised is, would you want? I mean, like, look at what happened with Ukraine. I mean, why is America? It's all but a formal NATO member, but is the US or NATO coming to its help? No, it's stuck. It has to manage by itself the best it
yeah,
can. It cannot survive for long. But this is the point that I've been making,
yeah,
that America is not trustworthy. Why? Because they look after their own interests, and that's fair enough.
yeah,
And this is how we should expect all of the countries to do as well. Because we think of countries that offer friendship as being, oh, great langotia yars, I mean, we just go out of the way. Then nobody goes out of the way.
yeah,
You look after your own interests, and you don't get into wars unnecessarily with third parties that you have no stake in.
yeah,
And so I've said that this is the reality that Asian states will have to begin to reconcile too. And so I have conceived of something called the Mod Quad, of course, where
yeah,
America is taken out. And instead of America, we have a bunch of very capable Southeast Asian countries led by Vietnam, Singapore, Philippines, Indonesia in the main, and then other countries that can come in. The
yeah,
US can still be an extraterritorial balancer, which is the role that it has always played. So it's not as if excluding it, they can come in if they want. And if they want to engage in cooperative, think great. If not, hey, that's fine. We'll manage. And then along with that, I've said we have to have a complementary BRICS that we are members of. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. That's an economic condominium. I said that turn it into a loose security coalition by removing China. So you remove America in one from modified quadrilateral, you remove China from BRICS, and you have BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa. And together, you have a tremendous, actually, look at it. If between Brazil and Russia and India and South Africa, we are so well positioned on the maritime highways, right? Brazil in the Atlantic, lower Atlantic, we are in the Indian Ocean. South Africa right there at the confluence of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. I mean, think of how you're controlling the oceanic highways.
yeah,
This is what I'm into geostrategy. That's my field among other interests. And I see the potential there, you know, and we can bottle up China any which way we want,
yeah,
and we make them out to be 8 feet tall monster. They're nothing of the kind. They had very good leadership, it's true. And they had far seeing, they're very strategic minded. All these things are there, but they can be easily contained and neutralized. And
yeah,
I've said that between the Mod Quad and BRICS, we'll be able to do a very good job of hedging in China,
yeah,
containing ring fencing China. And I think that's the way to go. And I think and I've always been, advocating things like giving strategically important armaments to all the states on China's periphery. We are beginning to do that with the BrahMos. I had said we should give nuclear weapons to anybody who wants it. Give it to Duterte in the Philippines, and let's see how the Chinese sweat bricks. We should begin doing that. But the government of India, as I said, is not really hard power minded. And my whole career has been in trying to trying to make the government of India a bit more appreciative of hard power. Because without hard power, all the Bharatnatyam dances and all You're not going to get you anywhere. And
Yeah.
not nor the Vishwa Guru kind of pretensions that you have. That's not what wins a country's great power status. What wins great power status is, hard power, military power. And the other thing I've said is we have to now, um, um, in Eastern Ladakh, we are actually, we are manifestly inferior in conventional military terms to China. And therefore, I've said we have to go first use nuclear with China, and we have to make it public that we are now vis-a-vis China. We are first use nuclear first use. And if you guys cross a red line, we are going to go nuclear. Let's see what will happen, because we can't match them in conventional terms. And therefore, we have to do what the Chinese did to America when the Americans had conventional military superiority. Uh, but the Chinese had the bomb
Yeah.
that could reach Los Angeles. Similarly, we threatened to take out all of their wealth producing entire region from Hong Kong up to Fujian coast up to Port Harbor, which we can do. And let's ask the Chinese, do you want to risk it? Because, hey, we are much poorer than you are. So the exchange ratio is you are then reduced to a fourth world state. You're finished. We'll ensure that you're finished. Your entire wealth producing, economically productive areas, we're going to take out. They'll become radioactive ruin. Yes, we'll be hurt, but then we'll ensure the dog in the manger like that you are finished for life. Now let's see how the Chinese react. And I'm saying this is the kind of risk that we should begin to take. And it's the hard part that people appreciate. It's not this nicey stuff that we have been known for 70 odd years, all that ahimsa and all that crap. It doesn't work in real life. In real life, the danda works far better, as we all know. And the sooner we begin to appreciate these aspects of hard power and power politics, the sooner I think India will be up and running as a power of consequence on the world scene.
Yeah. So I would like to conclude by asking that what is the way forward for both the countries, Russian Federation and Ukraine?
Well, look, the Russian Federation and Ukraine, as I said, the ultimate solution is going to be what I've just, sort of um, told you and postulated, which is Ukraine, which commits to not joining NATO, first of all, but a Ukraine minus the Donetsk and the Luhansk Russian-speaking areas. Those are going to be detached. They are not going to get it back. In any case, they didn't have it under their control anyway. So
Yeah.
losing them doesn't mean a thing for Ukraine, except in the territorial sense that the maps will now show that Luhansk and the Donetsk regions are gone. That's fine. The maps are changed often. That's a reality in international relations. And that the Black Sea will never be, in any sense, accessible to Western navies. So whether that is if Russians take over the Black Sea coast, or again get a commitment from Kiev saying, okay, fine, we'll share the coastal resources, naval resources, as was mentioned in the 1997 partition agreement, and everything is fine. So we go back to, in some sense, the status quo ante, minus these things, and with the commitment that you will not join NATO. And I think that's where we, ultimately, after all the, all the hoo-ha is about and all this jumping up and down and a little bit of hostilities and this, that, and the other, is what all the parties will agree on. Though, of course, the Americans would like to now use it to try and get Russia into a bit of a military muddle by financing militant groups and special forces or mercenary forces and so on. They have the option, but then Russians are are not amateurs when it comes to war fighting, because if you recall, they were the main reasons why the Allies won the Second World War. It's not the Allies, because I think Indians, and we have been so brought up by Montgomery and Patton and all this nonsense that we don't remember who really paid the price for winning the Second World War. Marshal Georgy Zukau's forces coming into Berlin and taking over and smashing the German war machine, where the Nazi Germany actually deployed 60 to 70% of its fighting forces against Russia, not against the Allies. People don't even know that. So this is what we need to keep in mind when we think of the Russian military machine. You don't tangle with it. my God, once they get going, it's the worst thing that can happen to you. And I think and that's why the Americans are keeping off. They know what that means. They don't want to have any part of it. Why NATO? Why John Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, said no. There'll be no. We don't want to get into it.
Yeah.
And he even was very apprehensive of giving any NATO aircraft. They said no, 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 no. But the Americans are trying to work it through some third party thing, God knows what. Now, I don't think any of this is going to work. How is Ukraine going to be benefited hugely by having third-rate MiG aircraft from 30 years ago
Yeah.
to go up against the modern Russian Air Force? I mean, it doesn't make sense. But hey, you want to prolong this? Okay, fine. The Russia has more stamina than you have to upkeep this. So, we'll see how it goes. But I don't think much will happen beyond what I've just told you. The solution will be this. If Ukraine is to retain some semblance of independence, if Zelensky wants to push the envelope and say, well, heck with it, I'll go down fighting, but I'll not give up, then I think he'll pay the price. And so will Ukraine. But I think cooler minds will prevail. Washington will come down to see that, hey, let's push these guys to say, okay, just accept some kind of a compromise.